Is there a habit in your life you'd like to change? How do you change a habit? There's something called the habit loop, which is the way a habit is structured. That's what we're talking about today. Welcome. This is Thursday Thoughts. This is where I take a subject and I give you tips, tricks, and techniques in order to be a better you. So this week we're talking about habits. We all have them, some good, some bad. So there's something called a habit loop. And this is how a habit is, made up. It's made up of three things. I'm going to minimize myself here and show you guys exactly what I'm talking about. So I'm not going to get into the story of Pepsodent and how they became, but this is a great example of how the habit loop began. So there's three things to a habit. There's the cue, which is the trigger. There is the routine, the actual habit itself, and then there's the reward at the end. So at the beginning, so here you see you have dirty teeth, and then your routine is you brush it, and then your reward is you have clean teeth. It's a pretty simple example of the habit loop. Here's another example, and this is, a lot of people go through this one. You're sitting there, you're just bored, and you start eating, and then that brings you joy. And then the third one example is, cigarettes, obviously, crazy addiction. And, sometimes when you just see that object or whatever it is, it triggers in your brain, oh, that's what I want. And that could be food as well. And there's a lot of different examples, but that's another example. And then obviously you get the reward of, if it's cigarettes, obviously the nicotine high. Food, it's the satisfaction of whatever you're putting into your body. So I'm going to tell you a story that kind of, it's a personal story that has both this one and this one kind of, in between. So I'm going to blow myself up here. This story is, I've always had a sweet tooth. Ever since I was young, I remember back in the day, I would go through the kitchen and I would grab a spoon and I would get a spoonful of sugar and I would put it in my mouth. That's how bad my sugar, addiction started. Then as I got older, I'd get an allowance on Friday and say it was $5. And I'd go down to the corner store. And at that time, candy bars were like 25 cents. So I'd buy $5 worth of candy bars and I would crush them. I would have them done, probably within 24 hours. I have my sweet tooth. So what happened is, so I knew I had a sweet tooth. But as I learned about this habit loop, the first thing you have to do to change any habit is you have to identify the cue, the trigger, the beginning point. And so I identified mine as after dinner. So every time, I was done with dinner, I would sit down and then that sweet tooth, that craving would come into my brain and I'd be like, I want some sweets. And I love ice cream. I love candy bars. And I would never buy anything at the store when I was going grocery shopping because I'm pretty healthy. And I understand that my willpower that time of night is pretty much zero. So I never had anything in the house. Unfortunately, I had this Circle K right down the street. So what I found myself doing is fighting it for 5, 10, 15 minutes. And the next thing you know, I'm walking to the corner store. I go grab my Ben & Jerry's or some candy bars or both or whatever, and then come back and, just devour it. And when I was done, I felt so much better. And I found myself doing this night after night after night. And I finally got to the point where I'm like, I have to change this. So once you identify the cue in any habit, the trigger point, the next thing to do is you have to find a replacement for the routine. So my routine obviously is loading my body and my brain with sugar. But, I'm doing it with, the ice cream and the candy bars. So I tried, brushing my teeth after dinner, eating mints, chewing gum. And those worked for about 20 minutes. And then that craving, in the brain just comes back up. So it happened one weekend when I was spending the weekend over at a girlfriend's house and we got done with dinner. And of course, what happens? The craving hits. And I'm like, oh, I want some sugar. So I went to the fridge. I went to the cupboards. I basically checked her whole house for sweets, nothing. So I found this bowl of these sweet black grapes and I got a bowl of them. And so I sat down and, popped one in my mouth and I was like, oh, that's pretty good. And I finished the bowl and I was satisfied. It was amazing. So the next night, same thing happened. After dinner, the craving hit. I'd go get the bowl of black grapes and boom, So for the next 6 months, I did not have black grapes in my fridge. And I never made a trip to that Circle K. I didn't eat any sort of refined or crack sugar, as I like to call it. I understand that the grapes have sugar, but it's a natural sugar, and I'll take that all day long over the crack refined sugar. So that was it. That was the way. It took me a little while to find the routine, and that's what happens is once you find your cue, whenever that sort of trigger point is, to find the routine that works for you that you're going to replace your old routine with. Sometimes it takes 3, 4, 5, different tries. So don't give up if the first one doesn't take. And obviously the reward, here's the part, it has to be similar. So the routine that you're replacing your old routine with has to give you a similar reward. And obviously the grapes did that. They had the sugar. So, obviously it tasted good. So I was like, okay, that's good. And then it goes to your brain and the brain gets the sugar. And that's where it's like, and that's the point. And if you don't know anything about sugar and the brain and how it works, it lights it up anytime you have sugar. And it's similar actually to doing cocaine. So, and you can Google that and there's plenty of articles on that. So anyway, so that's my story. And that's how you get over a habit or change a habit is you find that cue, that trigger point. I'll show you here again. So you find the cue, the trigger point, and then you get to the routine. You try out a few different things. And then again, it has to have a similar reward. So I wish you the best, go out and whatever, don't try and tackle 3 different habits at once, but take one and see if you can identify the cue, change up the routine, maybe a substitute of something, and that's giving you sort of a similar reward and see if that works. And hopefully it does for you. And then I'm going to end, like I always do, with a quote. Of course, it has to do with habits, and it is, "We are what we repeatedly do. Excellence, then, is not an act, but a habit." So with that said, practice excellence, over and over. Repetition, breeds consistency, which creates habits. So I wish you the best. I will see you next week.